You haven't been to my house and dressed me. Are you interested in working? I'm moving and. Oh, okay, so.
Just generally making the air and the soil around better. There's been a lot of awareness lately about the decline of bees, and bugs, birds, and other things, and it's creating a bigger interest in gardening for wildlife. A lot of you are here, I'm sure, simply because you want to know more about native plants and attracting birds and bees and things to your yards. We can't just leave native plants and things in parks or in meadows and things that are created by the state or woodlands. We need to start doing more of that and bringing those plants, those native plants, into our yards so that we can encourage that wildlife to come and to be in our yards as well as in the woods and other places. It'll also encourage that wildlife to propagate. And I don't know about you, but this year, if you go out at night, there's almost no bugs. You drive your car. It used to be you would drive your car and they were just, you'd come home and there was bugs all over. You would run into the bugs at night, the moths and things. We don't see them that much anymore. And we need to start bringing them back. The effects of climate change, a lot of people are talking about climate change. Climate change is having an effect. I've lived here off and on for, 20 years. And when I first lived here back in the 80s, I remember crepe myrtle trees. Crepe myrtle trees didn't grow here. And the reason they didn't grow here was because it was too cold. There were crepe myrtles, but they were shrubs. They would grow up in the spring and summer. They would become a big shrub and they would flower. But in the winter, it would be so cold that it would die back to the ground. Now you see crepe myrtles all over the place. But the changes that are coming from global warming, from it being warmer. The summers are hotter, they're wetter. The winters, they're not as cold, but when they do get cold, they really get cold. So a lot of the plants that we used to plant here, we're going to have to think about maybe they need more cold, and we need to start looking at plants that are a little more tolerant of heat and a little more tolerant of wet. Okay, let's move on. I planted a sunflower garden a couple of years ago, and this is pictures of my sunflower garden. The particular sunflowers that I put in, the majority of them were a variety called Lemon Queen. Now the reason I planted Lemon Queen sunflowers, for the most part, was because they produce a lot of pollen. Okay, and I wanted to encourage the bees, the native bees as well as the others. So I planted a lot of Lemon Queen sunflowers. Now the other ones in there are some smaller ones. They're the more decorative type. You can find all kinds of colors of sunflowers in seeds and things. So if you go to get some sunflower seeds or whatever, make sure you get the ones that do produce pollen. Okay, just an aside. By the way, I believe that's a silvery checker spot butterfly. I see a lot of those around the garden now that I put when I put the sunflowers in. Here were some other visitors that I had to my garden and my yard this year. The little deer up there, I believe he's an orphan, just by himself all the time. The turkeys are probably due to come visit me shortly. They love to come and sit in the back amongst the bushes. And we have the skunks. They still come and visit us at night. They like to clean up around the bird feeders. So, planting natives, especially ones that occur locally, will help in your yard, helps to reclaim some of the area that we've lost to development. And that's part of what people are trying to encourage people to do in their yards, is to plant gardens and plant native species so that we can increase the amount of plants that we actually have. There are maps that will show you that the amount of woods and vegetation, wild vegetation that we've lost to development in Maryland is horrendous. We've lost well over 50% of our vegetation that we had years ago in trees and native shrubs and things to development. People have to have places to live. I'm not saying that we aren't going to develop, but we need to start developing smartly. Natives generally will thrive if you give them the right conditions and you give them the right place. They will generally thrive and they'll do really well. You won't have to constantly worry about whether they're getting diseases or bugs or those sorts of things, because they have grown up in this area and are used to those things. What I have noticed is that if we study groupings of plants that grow together, if you take a walk out into the woods here in southern Maryland and you take your handy-dandy field guide to wild flowers and wild and trees, you can go out and identify all kinds of native plants growing together in small little ecosystems where they are supporting each other in their growth and development. A lot of times, we've seen a lot of trees go down here in the last few years from storms and things. A lot of times what you find is if you go out and you plant a tree, it may do well and grow really big. But after a few years, it may come over. One of the reasons they come over is because they don't have the supporting structures in the soil from other plants that help them grow good webs of roots. So underplanting under trees with shrubs and flowers and things helps them form a web of growth and roots and life underneath the ground that helps sustain them and helps keep them when the winds get bad and the soils get soggy. So a lot of trees come over around here because underground they've been actually undermined, either by digging or maybe some development comes close to an area, and then you find the trees start, over the period of a few years, start coming down. That's why. Interplanting natives and non-natives is a great way to go about planting natives in your yard. You don't have to go all native. I'm going to go through a little bit of basics on ecosystems here, because I think people talk about ecosystems and they talk about generally systems in biology, but I don't think people exactly explain what we mean when we talk about an ecosystem. There are vertical layers, and then there are horizontal layers in an ecosystem. Your vertical layers, as shown in this picture, start with your trees. Your big trees, you have a canopy up there. It's where all the leaves are, and they form a great big canopy, and they shade pretty much everything underneath. That's your canopy layer. And that consists primarily of large trees like oak trees, big oak trees. You might have some large maple trees, things like that get really big. Your understory layer, you're probably a little bit familiar with that because you'll find some of your smaller trees in there. You might find dogwood trees, redbuds, and you can see those out in the woods when you drive around here. They're on the roads. You can see the dogwoods when they bloom underneath the trees, the redbuds when they come in. That's your understory. Then you have your shrub layer. The shrubs, you can have blueberries, you can have blackberry bushes, you have rambling vines like the Virginia creeper, those sorts of things. Those all come into the shrub layer, the herbaceous layer. That's where you have your coneflowers, Coreopsis are down there, the shorter flowers and grasses and things that you find like in meadows. Those are kind of a ground layer type of planting. The last thing that we have, the ground layer is actually where you have leaves, and you'll have your Mayapples will be right down in the transition between the herbaceous and the ground layer. The little Mayapples that the box turtles like, because they grow on the forest floor. And so those are the layers now of a system, and you can see this if you go out into the woods, how nature has layered itself. This is an example of the horizontal layers that you find. Not only do you have now the height, the vertical as it comes down, now you have the horizontal where you can see in the back of this photograph, you can sort of see where there's this meadow area. And you can see where the meadow area kind of goes to bushes and trees. That's your transition zone, and also called the dynamic edge, because there's a lot of things going on in there. You're going to have small trees coming up, you're going to have some shrubs coming up, you're going to have some flowers coming up there. You have a lot going on in these different layers. Now, where I've got marked wet edge down here, you can't really see this because it rolls off, but the ground as it slopes off, it makes this area wetter. And it has a slightly different set of requirements over in that wet edge. It's going to want plants that are want a little bit more water. One of the things that likes to grow in those wet edges, especially if there's a little shade, is the cardinal flower, which we saw in one of the previous presentations. It likes to be wet. Your Monarda, your bee balms, okay? Some of those like a little bit damper soil. They would like to be along that wet edge there, and you might find them there. So what's a native? We've talked a lot about natives. The term native, people have said a lot of things about, okay, well, we're going to use natives. Well, what is it? A native plant is something that's actually grown up in the surroundings and has adapted to those surroundings, okay? It takes a long time for that adaptation to actually take place. So you can have natives that, say, are from California, okay? They have native plants out there. Those native plants will not generally, as a rule, do real well here on the East Coast because the climate conditions are not suitable. So when you're looking to find natives, try to find things that you know or you have read that come from, say, the East Coast or the Mid-Atlantic area, because they have generally come up around this area and have learned to thrive in the kinds of weather conditions that we have here and the soil conditions. There's been a lot of interest by the horticultural community in trying to produce more native plants, more varieties of native plants. For example, I'm sure some of you have seen the great big red coneflowers that you can buy at the nursery. The red ones, the orange ones, the yellow ones, okay? That's our horticulturists actually getting going and making more interesting flowers for us. The varieties that they come up with of native plants are generally fine, but there's a lot of discussion now as to whether we want native plants. Do we really want red coneflowers, which have been modified from the original? Do we want those to be able to propagate into the natural environment? Okay, so there's a lot of discussion going on about what are we going to do with native plants as we develop these different varieties. Do we want them to pollinate? What they're doing a lot is they're making sterile hybrids of a lot of these plants. So what will happen is they won't set seed and they won't propagate. The question then becomes, is the pollen still good for providing the appropriate nutrition for bees and bugs and flowers. So there's a lot of discussion about what's happening with native plants. I would suggest that you stick to reputable nurseries and reputable seed companies, because they will have native plants and seed native plants that's going to be appropriate to put out in our gardens. Some of the other ones, the other thing you need to be aware of is sometimes these plants will revert back to their original native nature. I had some of those red cone flowers a few years ago. They've all turned purple. They've all gone back to purple. So they know best what they are supposed to be doing. So don't be surprised if you buy something and in a few years, perhaps, it will turn back to its original native genes. One other thing that I would caution you about is don't go on native plant safari. Go and enjoy the woods, go have a look, see what's there, see what grows together, and see what things are living in harmony with each other. But I would stay away from trying to, take some of them home or even to propagate them, because what happens is if you take them out of the natural environment, you don't know, but you might be taking the last one of that species in that area. So that cuts down on the numbers of plants that are now seeding and trying to recover their populations. The other thing is, you might run afoul of the law. Some places, some states, it's actually illegal to take native plants out of their environment. It may be even illegal to take seed from them. So stick to the nurseries and stick to reputable seed houses if you want to get native plants. I've listed some here, some examples of native plants and that grow in the different layers. You can use those as you would, for reference. These are things that generally grow in the mid-Atlantic and in this region. Basic prep work for a garden. Okay, everybody's gone out and dug the ground up and planted a garden. But if you're going to plant a garden for native plants, or you're going to plant a garden for any kind of flowers or shrubs, you need to do some basic groundwork first. Get an idea of what you want to do. Do you want a vegetable garden? Do you want a flower garden? Do you want to have berries or fruits, or what is it you want to have in your garden? Get some idea of what that is. Get to know your yard. Go and walk your property. If it's a big one or a little one, walk it from edge to edge. Take a notebook, see what's there. You would be surprised. Even if you buy a house that somebody's already planted a bunch of things, you'd be amazed. If you just wait a year and look every season and walk your yard, you will find all sorts of plants and things that people have put in. There may be all sorts of native plants in there already. So you should go and get familiar with your yard. Look and see, where is it wet? Where is it dry? Where is the sun? Where is the shade? Okay, those things are important to plants. And important to you because it means, depending on how much work you want to do. If you want to put in plants that take a lot of water and you're putting them in a dry area, now we're talking about watering and irrigation systems. So understand your property, see what's there, and then you can start to think about what you want to do with it. Get a soil analysis. If you do nothing else when you leave here today, pick up a packet, get some information. I have a link in the references on this package that will take you to the webpage to tell you how to do it. But get a soil analysis for your property, for where you want to plant. It's so important that you understand what your soil is like before you go planting. Even if you're going to just put in a whole lawn, understand what the soil is like, because if you go out and you buy some lime and buy some fertilizer and throw it down and then throw down some grass seed, it'll come up, but it won't do as well as if you go and get that soil analysis and put down those things that you need, and don't spend your money on fertilizer and things that you don't. Okay? So the soil analysis to tell you what you're starting with is really, really important, whether you're doing a garden or a lawn or any type of planting. This is a sample of a soil analysis. This is one that I had done on my property. I think it was done, the one I had done for the lawn. But you can see it tells you exactly what's in your soil. The nice part is the people from the soil analysis company, they also tell you what you need. They tell you how much lime you need, they tell you how much fertilizer you need, what kind of fertilizer you need, so you don't end up spending a lot of money for something that you don't need. This also helps the Chesapeake Bay because we're not having fertilizer runoff from lawns that is not being used by the lawn. Fertilizer runoff is a big problem with the Chesapeake Bay. It's one of the biggest problems that we have. It's not just from Maryland, it's from Pennsylvania and Virginia as well. So by encouraging people, if you're going to have a lawn, to understand what chemicals you need to put down and put only those things down, we can eliminate a lot of a big source of pollution for the Chesapeake Bay from the runoff of lawns. So the other picture over there is a picture I made. That's the plat outline of my property. What I did here is I took that and I marked on there where the house was. I've got a garden there and I've got a garden shed and where the woods are. But it gave me a place to start. It showed me what my property looked like and where I had open space to work with and where I had other things. So it's just a nice way, once you start walking around your property and seeing what's there, is to keep a picture of what you have. All right, next step, make a plan. Everybody has to make a plan if you're going to make a garden. If you're going to plant native plants, make a plan. Resist. Spring is coming. There's going to be gorgeous plants out there in Lowe's and every place else. Resist. It's hard. I know. I don't do a good job because every spring I come home with some plants. I just do. I love plants. I love gardening, and I always come home with plants. But I try really hard not to make major purchases until I know where I'm going to put them, because it breaks my heart to go put a plant in the ground and have it do really good for maybe a year, maybe two, and then all of a sudden you come out one day and it just croaks. And you're like, what happened? If you look really hard, you'll see it was either planted in the wrong place, it either got too much water, not enough water, too much sun, not enough sun, something of that nature. So resist the urge to come and buy those beautiful plants until you have some idea of what you want to do with them. Okay? And you've got time now, because it's just February, you can sit down and look at your garden and look at your yard, and say, well, if I want to put some annuals in this year, what might I like to do? It gives you something to go by when you go to those stores and you see all those beautiful plants. You already know you have a plan, so you've got something you can work from. When you go to make this map, like I had up there, use your plat. If you have a piece of property, it has boundary lines. You all got a copy of your plat when you bought your property. Use those boundary lines, mark the artifacts on there, so then you know where you want to plant. You can also mark things on there like if you have a play set or you have a play area for your kids, mark that on there because that's probably going to stay grass and you're going to want to improve your grass in that area. If you've got a wet area, you're probably going to want to make a note of that because you want to make sure that you put things over there that are going to not succumb to having wet feet. So you need to map out your area, plan your garden based on the areas that you use, the areas that you don't use, and the areas you might want to plant. This is the diagram that I came up with when I did my survey of my property. Those blue lines show you how the water runs off quite a lot. So you can see this area over here, where this blue arrow is. That stays kind of wet over there most of the time. Okay? The other blue area over there is a ditch. It's a runoff ditch. So I know that's wet, and I know that's wet. The yellow stripe, that's the arc of the sun in the summertime. I know that the sun goes like that over my property in the summertime. So, and in the wintertime, that orange arc is where the sun goes. So what happens is, I have some woods on this side of the property. Those woods cast a huge long shadow in the wintertime onto the property. So I know that I don't want to plant anything in there that wants full sun, okay? I don't want to put fruit trees in there, for example. You wouldn't want to have fruit trees over there because it's wet and because it has a lot of shade. So by doing the map like this and mapping out your property, you can also get an idea of what kind of plants you're going to want to plant in some of these areas. Now, the other one, you can see the green areas. I marked off areas to plant in. Those are the areas that I've designated that I'm going to put in some plantings over time. This is a nice way for you to summarize what the data you've gotten from your lot from just walking around.
Ms. Stephanie,
Mm-hmm.
back to the soil testing,
Mm-hmm.
briefly, just to make sure I understood it, if you took a soil sample that you wanted in your garden,
Mm-hmm.
but then you don't know what the lawn is, do you have to do different soil testing?
You should, yes.
Okay, that was my question, for different areas.
What I did is, the lawn, I did soil tests for the lawn specifically. Now, I have, you can see that box up there next to the house. That's a garden bed. That is a garden. It's about a 40 by 38 garden. It has 14 raised beds in it. Now, when I put that in, and I had topsoil brought in to put in there, what I did when I was done building it, I took samples of that soil, packed it up, and sent it off for a soil sample. Now, the people that do the soil samples ask you what you want to do with, or what you're going to do in this area. If it's lawn, they give you one set of criteria. If it's fruits and vegetables and stuff like that, they give you another set of criteria. So they will tell you what you need to add to the soil depending on what your use is. So it's important you understand what you want to do there before you get your soil sample.
Great, thank you.
This is just a sample of what I'm going to do on my particular property. This is what I've started with. This is a work in progress, okay? I've been working at this for a while, but some things have done better, some things have done worse. It just depends on the weather and how things go in the yard. Things to consider when choosing plants, whether it's native or cultivated. You choose native plants like you would any other plant, okay? If you like the colors, or you like the form, or you're looking for a shrub, or maybe you want to plant blueberry bushes, want to get some blueberries. You have to fight birds off for those, but blueberries will grow here. Use a reputable nursery. There are some lists of nurseries. I've given you some links at the end of this presentation. Consider the growing requirements and the growth habit of some of these native plants. Some plants, if they're given really good conditions, they grow like gangbusters. Black-eyed Susans are notable, okay? I planted black-eyed Susans, and I planted them in one of my flower beds thinking I was going to have some nice, pretty daisy-like flowers. Well, within 2 years, I had nothing but black-eyed Susans because they were seeding with wanton abandon everywhere. So research your plants a little bit, especially if they're natives. There is information available on them because sometimes they either, once they're given really good growing conditions in your yard, which you're going to give them because you love them, they're going to grow, and they're going to grow maybe a little more than you want. Many native plants, many native plants, are the favorite food of deer and rabbits and other things. My big problem, believe it or not, was not the deer, it was the rabbits. The rabbits love black-eyed Susans. They will eat coneflowers, they will eat phlox, they will eat just about anything that's green. So I went and planted all these lovely little flowers, and I put them in flower beds, and the bunnies came and they feasted. I had lots of little bunnies, but not a lot of flowers. So you want to think about what, wildlife you may have. A lot of people, like, see out in this yard out here, they're not going to have, or at least not for a while, bunnies and deer because it's so wide open. But after a while, they'll find it. And you need to think about that. Many native plants have cycles where they don't last. Okay, coneflowers are a perfect example. I planted coneflowers, just regular purple coneflowers. And I noticed after a few years, I didn't have as many coneflowers, and I wondered what was going on. Well, the life cycle of the coneflower is such that after a few years, it sort of gets exhausted and dies back, but it seeds itself. So the idea is in the wild, it will seed itself and new ones will be coming up in that area over time. So be aware of the cycles of some of your plants, and some of them, they do just naturally, they will die on their own after a few years because they're just tired. But they've seeded and they've done their job, and hopefully, the new ones, the babies are coming up. So you may have to replant some of these things, is my point, over time. So you might have to be aware of that. Planting a mix of natives and maybe annuals and things in your yard, it's great. I mean, you want something that looks pretty. You want something that looks pretty from spring till fall. And a lot of times, the best thing to do that with is annuals. Your regular annual plants, whether it's marigolds or other pansies or things like that. They look nice. Intersperse them with natives, and you'll have a really nice border garden or whatever you want. It'll look really nice, and you'll have done the job that you wanted to do of including some native plants, but also have some nice color and things in your yard over the season. Okay. Now here's an example of some native plants growing together underneath an oak tree. You can see this was apparently a picture. It was in one of the textbooks back there, and it was taken in spring. So these are some spring flowers that have come up, but there is apparently some Dutchman's britches under here and a few other things that are just starting to come up. What you'll have is then you'll have a succession of flowers and plants that come and die back. So plan for that in your yard as well, because that will happen even with some of the perennial plants and shrubs that you buy. They come up, they do their thing, and then they go back down. So you're going to want a succession plant in your yard, even with native plants. Now, here's what I started with. This is what I had. And this is after they started to clean it up. I had what was called the trash lot. It was the lot that the developer used to dump all his excess concrete. If he needed a load of dirt, this is where he got it. If he had to dump some trees, this is where he put them. So this is what I had to start with. This is where my lot started. Once they cleaned it up, it looked like this. The proverbial blank slate. There was nothing there. And what you see there is actually not soil, but subsoil. They had taken all the soil off that lot and used it to build up another lot where somebody wanted a walkout. So they took everything, including some of the subsoil. So what I had to start with was right down at the subsoil clay, good stuff layer. But, you know, it's a challenge. So the phase one that I did was I wanted to plant some trees. I needed some trees on that lot. I wanted to, and I went and I looked for a nursery. I wanted big trees. I wanted 15 feet plus because I needed something on the lot. It had to be something dramatic because it was just empty. I found a nursery. They sent the guy down. He said, sure. I said, I want native trees. I want all natives. I want to, you know, start doing adding natives back onto the property. So he said, we can do that. He said, we can put some red maples by the driveway and some sugar maples, some red buds, some birches. And what we ended up was with this. We had birch trees up by the house. We had sugar maples on one side and red maples on the other side of the driveway. The tree that you see right there in front of you was something called the Styrax sebacea. It was a gorgeous little tree. It had these flowers hung down in sort of like, they were like grapes. They were like little white bell flowers that hung in sort of grape clusters. They were really pretty trees. And I thought, wow, we're making progress here. This is great. That was the winter that they got planted, and then you can see in the spring where they had started to grow. There was some right there on the right-hand side were some witch hazels that they had planted out in the yard. And then come the problems. We had a drought that year. So I spent the year out there with hoses, and I bought those donuts that you can put around the trees and around shrubs, and I was madly filling donuts and watering with hoses, and it was quite something. But they managed to get through the first year. The second year, we got a drought again. And we had heat over 100 degrees. Well, it was starting to take its toll on some of the trees and some of the shrubs. The Franklin trees, they couldn't take it, that they had planted out there. The Franklin trees that they had planted out in the yard in the middle of the full sun, Franklin trees generally don't grow. They're more like an understory tree. So with that full sun and that drought, they were just withering. And eventually they dried up. I had fothergilla, I had witch hazels, I had little Henry sweetspires that were all underneath some of these trees that they planted. Most of those succumbed to the drought. They were planted when the guy came in and planted them, he planted them in raised beds, okay? Which is what a lot of people like to do, is put things up. Now, because they were planted in raised beds, their roots were above the ground level. So with the drought, it made it that much drier and that much harder for those shrubs and those trees to actually get moisture. So that didn't help them. So note to self, don't plant things in big, tall, raised beds because you're going to have a watering problem. Nowadays, when I do raised beds, I only do them very low. I do them maybe this high, just enough to get off the main ground to sort of make a delineation of where to cut the grass, but not real high, because it doesn't let the roots get down into the soil where the water is, and you really have a watering issue if you really put them in too high, which is what happened with a lot of the shrubs. The sugar maples were planted on the side of the driveway where the rain runs, the runoff from the rain runs down. They were too wet. And sugar maples will not really do real good down here because they don't get cold. They need cold weather. So a sugar maple was actually probably not a good choice for this. The end result was that the red buds, the maples, the birches, and the viburnums that I planted up in the back, they all seemed to do okay. with lots and lots of watering and lots of help. But a lot of the other plants just didn't make it because they weren't planted in good conditions. In the meantime, I was out, I thought I was doing great. I was out with my nice big garden and I was buying plants willy-nilly. I was getting native plants and sticking them in my garden beds inside the fenced-in yard. I thought, we'll grow them in there for a little bit and then I can move them out in the yard. Well, they took over. They got such good conditions in that garden that they grew like mad. The Monarda, which is a bee balm, the heart-leaved asters, the black-eyed Susans. I got some fringed loosestrife, really nice little plant. It likes moist soil. They get pretty yellow flowers and the bees love them. That went crazy. The black-eyed Susans, they just ran right over the summer phlox. The milkweed, I had some common milkweed and I planted it in a bed. Well, it did wonderfully. It was this tall, okay? It had beautiful purple flowers and they smelled heavenly. Only one problem. Milkweed, the common milkweed has runners. It has a runner about the size of my finger and it sends them out everywhere. I had milkweed coming up in my tomato plants. I had milkweed in my cucumbers. I had milkweed everywhere. The bees were happy. I was a bit distressed, but nonetheless. So you have to understand what it is you're planting and where. Here's the milkweed. There it is. Great patch of milkweed. It was terrific. I tell you what, it's a wonderful, wonderful plant, but you need to give it a place where it can just be by itself and just come up and grow. It does wonderfully. I ended up having to move that out in the yard somewhere else. The black-eyed Susans, you can see them coming up there. You can also see a piece of that milkweed showed up on the other side of the garden, all on its own. But you can see I've got some zinnias in here. I've got some French marigolds. So I implanted, regular annuals and native flowers all in these garden boxes, and they did really nicely together. This was the tomatoes. The tomatoes, actually, there is some milkweed in there. I had some sunflowers that came up in there that were volunteers from the year before. The chickadees had gotten, and the goldfinches had gotten into the sunflowers that were in my garden and had spread some of the seeds around. But that's all right, we like volunteers. But you can see the sunflower got quite large. That's, again, one of the lemon queens that produce a lot of pollen. Okay, next steps. Obviously, I wasn't doing things quite right, though. Things weren't going exactly as I wanted them to go. So I decided to get some help. I went and joined the Master Gardeners. I figured, although I had been gardening for well over 40 years with vegetables and flowers and in a lot of different places, I still needed some help. There was a lot I didn't know, obviously, especially about native plants. I reassessed all the plantings. I did the survey that you saw. And I also took a course from the University of Maryland Extension called The Woods in Your Backyard. It's a really, really nice course, especially if you have woods on your property. It helps you to go out and identify the trees and things that you have. It helps you show you how to do a survey on your property and learn about the plants that you have. And it was just it was a good introduction for me to the natural woods that I have behind my house. I did a lot of research. I read a lot of books. I took the information I learned from the Master Gardeners about how to plant shrubs and trees and what shrubs and trees to plant. And that's where I learned about soil and soil analysis and all of those things. The Master Gardener course that they give you to become a Master Gardener is a terrific course. And if you really want to learn about plants and trees and shrubs and gardening, fruit trees, grass, whatever it is, it's the best course I think you could take. And I highly recommend it to anybody who wants to take it. I reassessed the plantings, I did more research. I got the fence garden, and I started putting plants into the fence garden, more trees and shrubs and things in there to eventually go out into the yard. I repaired the lawn. At that point, I realized the lawn was not doing well. The lawn had been reseeded and fertilized to death by the developer, because he would come out, plant the lawn, it would come up in the spring, within about 3 weeks, 4 weeks, it was brown. It just died. And I'm like, something's not right here. So, based on what I learned from the Master Gardeners, I started over. I did the soil analysis, I got that back. I looked on the website at the University of Maryland. I looked at the lists of turf grasses that are recommended for the area. They do a study every couple of years of grasses that have come out, regular cultivated grass types, and they grow them in yards up in the University of Maryland. Then they come out with a list that says these are the recommended turf type grass varieties that we recommend for the area. So I got that, I looked at that, studied that, picked out the varieties that I thought would work, and took the soil analysis, and then in the fall I went to work. I put down between 10 and 15 yards of compost over the yard. I put down the lime and the fertilizer that was recommended by the soil analysis, and I also put down a blend of grass seed that I knew had the varieties that were recommended by the University Agricultural Center. And this is what I have now. So my project for the last 3 years has mostly been to get that done, because I was having erosion of the soil, I was having a lot of issues, nothing was growing out there, so that was my 3-year project, and so far it seems to be working. But I needed all that information before I actually spent the money to do this, because otherwise it was just throwing money at the lawn and just watching it fly away. Now I'm going to try and start to do some plantings. I'm going to try and start to do some tree plantings and other things in the yard. I've done more survey work. I've learned more from the Master Gardeners. I've done more reading and more research on native plants. So, now what do we got? Here we go. There we are. Okay. So this is now what I have. I have some areas that I've designated for planting. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spend my time and money initially on good bones. I'm going to spend it on trees, understory trees, and maybe some large shrubs. But I'm not going any farther than that for the first year or two, because I want to give those planting areas good bones, what I call good bones. Give them a good structure to start with, so that I can then underplant them as they grow, and providing with a little more shade, I can start pulling some of those nice understory plantings underneath them. But you have to start with good bones. So these are the things that I'm going to attempt to do. And these were just these next couple of slides were just some plans that I had for what I thought I was going to put under in some of these areas. Notes going forward, things that I learned: do the groundwork. Literally do the groundwork. Do your research. decide what it is you want to do with your yard, decide where you want to plant, decide where you want to leave areas of grass for kids to play, or play sets, or whatever you need. Make a plan. Think about what you want to do. Think about what kinds of plants you want to plant. And then do the groundwork. Get your soil analyses and give yourself a break where you're not constantly trying to plant things and have them die. Understand your yard, understand the conditions, and enjoy your yard. Enjoy those plants, enjoy planting. Go out there and plant lots of native plants and see the bees and the birds come, because they will come. I've seen more different varieties of birds this winter than I think I've seen in all the last 10 years that I've been at this property now. And it's because the trees are starting to come back. Some of the shrubs and things are starting. The birch trees have matured now, and they're full of those little green caterpillars that hang down on strings and get you in the springtime. The chickadees love them. They come in there and I'll see them. But they used to hang down and used to get all over. I'd walk out underneath and they'd be everywhere. Not anymore.
Cankerworms, isn't that what it's called?
No, these aren't cankerworms. These are like inchworms. They're little green ones like this. And what it is they love to eat those birch leaves. But the birds are getting them now. So I don't have quite as many on me. So they will come. If you plant it, they will come. Guaranteed. But have a plan. Use your native plants in your landscape. You'll be glad that you did. They'll bring a lot of birds and bugs that will be helpful in the long run for you. But mostly enjoy your yard. Get out there and look at what you have. Enjoy what's there, because it's a wonderful thing to go out and just to spend time in your yard with the birds and the trees. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you to Deb Mayfield, and she's going to talk to you about planting native plants in containers.
I want to thank the ones who have stayed. Thank you very much. We're going to be doing planting natives in containers, and I have met a few people that have taken some of my container classes before. One of the things that I do for master gardeners is I have a vegetable garden at the fairgrounds that we do 365 days a year. It shows people what they can grow in containers. You can feed your entire family from containers. So I'm kind of the one that they always get to do this type of stuff. But it is easy to do natives in containers of all kinds. This is a beautiful container here with natives that are growing right there. You can just put them all together and so forth. So we're going to learn the basics of container gardening. One of the things is you have to have different size containers for what you want to grow. If you're ever going to grow vegetables like tomatoes and things like that, the bigger the pot, the better. Some of these, depending on what you're growing, don't need as much, but we're going to look at some trees and some areas and containers. The basics of container gardening. One is good, light, potting soil. No garden soil whatsoever can go in the pots because it's too heavy. It doesn't allow drainage. I had a gentleman one time ask me, okay, what's the ratio of garden soil to potting soil? I said, no garden soil. He goes, okay, what about 50-50? I'm going, no garden soil. And then he's saying, okay, how about 90-10? And I said, well, that's about the best you're going to get, but I still would recommend potting soil. You use the proper size pot for what we're doing. I make sure there's drainage holes at the bottom, just standard stuff. If it's a heavy pot, like I'm going to show you some trees and so forth that you can grow in pots, you might want to place the pot first where you're going to have it so that you are not trying to move that. Now there are things you can do with wheels. You can put them on wheels, like I have them on my decks. And so sometimes I do move them that way. I have some big tree type stuff on my decks. And sometimes you can do that. Yeah, it's always a good idea to put pot feet on them as well because that helps with drainage. So you can raise them up on a brick. You can put pot feet. You can put anything just to raise that up a little bit. Okay? Now, I would love this pot. In containers, there's always 3 rules. You want the thriller, the filler, and the spiller. And that will give you a nice arrangement as we go through this. These are ideas of some thrillers that are natives. Just different kinds. Joe Pye weed, we got ferns that can be thrillers, the red dogwoods are thrillers, whatever you have that is you want to, is the dynamic piece that's in the container. Here are some ideas of some spillers. They will spill over. You've got some carrots in here, you've got some, the purslane and the nut one will eventually just kind of come right over the pot. Then you got the fillers, the little ones you want to stick in and fill it, like you did in the first one that had the dogwood, and then it had stuff in the middle, that's your fillers. And so anything can be a filler depending on how high you're, or what you're trying to do. Here's some examples of some native plantings. They're all native plants only. And you've got all sorts, you've got the native hibiscus and the dogwood again there. We have some pussy toads in some places, heucheras, and you can also mix pots. Like she was saying with your gardens, you can mix regular garden plants with your natives so that you can, and then one of the things I would say is they'll die, okay? This one dies now, so what you do if it's an annual, you pop it out and you put another one in for that season. If it's a perennial, you just kind of move it over and plant something else in there so that your containers look good the entire season. You can pop out anything and put it back, or like I said, if it's perennials, try and move them over and add other plants to them. You can go all the way through the winter like that. There's some people who add sticks and cones and all that kind of stuff in there too. So you can just keep your containers looking good all year. You want to make sure that you put all the shade plants with the shade plants. You can't put sun where there's shade, because like she was saying, she had to learn, I live in the shade. And I tried to plant all kinds of sun plants there, everywhere, and they all died. I'm going, what's going on? So you have to make sure that you keep whatever requirements are. If it's a plant, if there are plants that need more moisture, if there are plants that need less, there's more arid plants, you want to make sure that that's what's all together, because otherwise you're going to be fighting it and it's not going to work. If you happen to have part sun, part shade, and that type of thing, you can mix those up, because you're going to put them in a place that's kind of both, and that's okay. You want to make sure that they get the right soil type. Is it neutral or is it acid? And there's different things that you can do. You can even do soil tests with that. You can also pick up a soil test. Testing kits, it's like at Lowe's or one of those places. And that can help you in the containers on what kind of soil you have. And we already talked about the new plants. I have a tendency to get ahead of myself. Let's start with native edibles. There are a lot of native edibles that we can put in pots. Fruit trees such as pawpaws and persimmons and cherries, just to name some. Native bushes of blueberries and huckleberries, frackleberries, cranberries, American red raspberries are all native. 3 sisters on the vegetables, the corn, the squash, the beans. You just have to find the native ones of those. Wild rice, ground nut vine, or parsley, violets. Most of the herbs that are grown here, there's also wild onions and wild garlic can go with them, and you can eat that. Next, we're going to eat your weeds. So this is what we're going to put in here. The ground nut, which is very pretty, it's a vine. They were a staple of the Native American. Colonists came, they taught the colonists how to cook with them, use them, and then the colonists started growing them and not allowing the Indians or the Native Americans to have any of it, which that's kind of our history in it. What is edible on this is the roots. They're like potatoes, and they used them like potatoes. They peeled them, they boiled them, they roasted them, they did all of that. And now it's become kind of a thing, a lot of restaurants are starting to use them. So I want to get some so I can see what it tastes like. Plantain weeds, you can eat those. The leaves and the seeds are what's edible with those. It can help reduce inflammation. It contains vitamins A, C, and K, as well as potassium and calcium. Plantains from the seed heads in sun to part shade. So you can eat those. All those grow everywhere in your yards. You know, and you can go harvest them as long as you didn't put fertilizers or pesticides on them. Here is lamb's quarter. Lamb's quarter is everywhere. Lamb's quarter used to be a prized plant. It is incredibly nutritious. It's loaded with fiber, protein, vitamins A and C, as well as magnesium, calcium, and copper. And it's high in omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. They can be high in oxalic acid, so if you may find that might upset your stomach somewhat, but if you cook them, then that kind of removes it, so it's a little easier. But you can use them in salads, you can use them cooking. Indian cuisine uses lamb's quarters a lot. Then we have purslane. Purslane, the leaves, the stems, the flowers are all completely edible. Purslane is tart and a little salty, which makes them great for salads. They're rich in vitamins and minerals, potassium, calcium, iron, folate, choline, magnesium, and a little bit of protein. You can add them to soups, side dishes, salads, grill them on the grill. They're great. The next, of course, is violets. Everybody loves violets, and violets are edible. They are very, very good. I really like them a lot. The leaves and the flowers are both edible, but they contain calcium and magnesium, vitamin A, C, as much seed as a blood orange per gram. Since it is a wild violet, it can be used in large quantities and is safe for people on medicine. Use it for visual interest on top of a cake or other desserts. You can freeze the blossoms in ice cubes and use them that way. You can candy them and make them they're very good candied if anybody's ever had that. And they're very good just fresh in your salad. You can make jams and syrups and all kinds of things out of wild violets. And they're beautiful too. All of the above weeds can be grown in the same container. The ones that I just showed, they can all go in the same one. All of them are perennials, except for the lamb's quarter, and then you can just replant. The thriller, you can add a trellis to the middle of the container or to the back of it, and then grow the ground nut up that. That could be your thriller. The fillers could be the plantains, the violets, the lamb's quarters, and the spillers could be the purslane, or you can add prairie drop seed to it or a carrots. If something starts to die, you just replant it. There is no rule that you cannot combine natives and non-natives. That's what I had said earlier. So that can make a really dynamic pot or container. Here, we're going to talk about fruit trees in containers. This is a pawpaw, and pawpaws grow very well in containers. You have to have a large container. You want to do the native persimmon. You want to use a very large pot. Persimmons need full sun, soil that kind of stays moist. And if you look in the picture here, there are fillers and spillers in this picture with the, yeah, thank you. Yes?
There's such, they get so large, how often do you have to change the pot?
Well, I would start with a large pot, and they will not get as large as they would in the ground, but they will grow towards your pot. That's how I've grown the trees at mine.
Stay living,
Mm-hmm. Now, what I do, I will say, about every 4 years, I take it out of the pot. I clean up the roots and things like that, move things around, give it some fresh soil. That I do with any of my trees.
It's a big job.
Yeah, but it's not, well, it depends on if you love it or not, you know. This is crab apples that were grown in containers, and those are kind of cool. This is the lollipop crab apple. It's full sun, but they did, if you would have seen this whole picture, they have an entire row of them as a fenced line on this property here. And it was really kind of cool. And then this is a cherry in a pot. Cherries can grow very well in pots. Most of the fruit trees, they do not go as big, usually. Some, you can prune them if you want to. You can do, just about any size. You need to have, like trees like this need to be in full sun. Most of the fruit trees need full sun. They benefit from mulch to keep them moist, because cherries like the soil to be moist, not soggy and wet, but moist. And then we got shrubs. There are a lot of native shrubs you can grow in containers. and you can showcase them better that way. Wouldn't it be nice to have a blueberry bushes or some type of fruit bushes right outside your back door, and so in the morning when you want to have breakfast, you just go pick them and then go right back in? And I have a fellow master gardener who grew a pawpaw this way, right in her container. This is blueberries in a container. Blueberries grow very well here. And one thing about containers is you can control the environment somewhat. And you can get them to where that they will grow the way that you need them to grow with the right soil mixes, all of that different type of stuff. Blueberries is best grown in a 50-50 potting soil and peat moss. Yes?
What about in the wintertime? Do you do anything to protect them or anything like that?
It depends on what it is. A lot of them, you can do row covers over them, or you can throw blankets over them. My trees at my house, I don't do anything. They just lose their leaves and then they come back. Because I've grown things that are from here, so you don't have to worry as much. But because of the pot, they will get colder. And you have to worry if the pot is one, like, if you use clay pots, they can have a tendency to crack and break. So sometimes it's better to use some of those newer pots, you know, that are the foam type and that type of thing. Make sure they have a lot of drainage in them. I've not had a problem yet. The only thing I have a problem with is one of my hydrangeas that I have to go out and cover that are in some containers at my house. But here we have cranberries. And this cranberry is in a small pot. But then somebody also did, now I'm going to try and pronounce this right, Espare, is that how you, am I pronouncing that correctly? And that's where you grow them up on a wall, and you use wires and stuff, and you grow them to where they're flat against the wall. I have one master gardener grew all of her pawpaws that way. She put them in pots along a fence and then did that with all the pawpaws. If you ever get a chance to go to the Biltmore in South North Carolina, they have a whole section where all the plants are in pots and they've got them all against the fence. And so they did that here with one of the cranberries, and I thought that was kind of cool that they did that. You can do it with the cherry tree, you can do it with the crab apples, just about anything. It just takes time to train them to grow on those wires. And you have to prune them and so forth. You want to put in plants, and they need to be at least 12 to 18 inch containers for the cranberries. They grow in full sun, and they're evergreen plants, so they're pretty all year. This way too, you can move them away from the deer and the rabbits and all of that when you do them in containers. And I can put them in places where the deer can't get to. Although they came right up to my front door and ate my hosta right off my front porch. So, yep, they're just very tame. And these are huckleberries. You can grow huckleberries in containers. I love huckleberries. Some people do, some people don't. You use a growing medium with this one with a lot more peat moss and potty mix again. Black huckleberries grow to 1 to 6 feet tall. They bloom early in the spring and best grown in full sun locations. And then they also like where up on a bench or up higher on some taller feet or a container or your plant stands, because then it allows the cold to dissipate away from them. The cold kind of goes like this, they say, and it causes a warmth underneath. I have not heard that before, but enjoy and have fun. Boy, that was fast. But it's showing different, these are some different flowers. You can use anything that's native in containers. And that way you can have it where you want it. You can keep the bunnies and the deer and all of that away from it. So containers are fun. I enjoy them very much. I would like to thank everybody for coming and thank all of you for staying.